After the maid was fired, her toddler made one phone call. The billionaire fired everyone. Nobody in that house saw it coming. Not the cook, not the driver, not even the woman who ran that mansion like a queen on a throne. They thought they were dealing with a poor maid and her 6-year-old son. They had no idea who that little boy was about to call. Her name was Rosa. She was 53 years old, with hands rough from 30 years of scrubbing floors that weren't hers, cooking meals she'd never be invited to eat, and raising a grandson who was the only light left in her tired world. Folks, if you're watching this today, I want you to picture your own mother, your own grandmother, because Rosa could have been any of them. She worked for the Whitmore family, one of the richest families in the city. Big house, iron gates, marble floors that echoed when you walked on them. Mrs. Whitmore, the lady of the house, treated her staff like furniture. She never learned their names properly. She called Rosa the help. Just the help. Like Rosa wasn't a woman who had buried a husband, raised 2 daughters alone, and now was raising her daughter's son, Karna, a sweet 6-year-old boy with big brown eyes and a gap-toothed smile, because Rosa's daughter had passed 2 years before from an illness that took her far too young. Every single day, Rosa brought Karna to work with her because she had no one else to watch him. Mrs. Whitmore allowed it, grudgingly, only because Rosa worked for almost nothing. Karna would sit quietly in the corner of the kitchen, coloring in an old notebook, waiting for his grandmother to finish her 12-hour shift. He knew the rules by heart. Sit still, don't touch anything, don't speak unless spoken to. And every day, without fail, he would look up at his grandmother's scrubbing pots twice his size and think to himself, one day, I'm going to take care of her. The other staff members liked Rosa. The cook, a heavy-set woman named Delia, would sneak Karna extra cookies when Mrs. Whitmore wasn't looking. The driver, an older man named Frank, would let Karna sit in the front seat of the car sometimes, just for a minute, pretending to drive. They all knew Rosa worked harder than anyone in that house. They all knew she deserved better. But they also all knew that speaking up against Mrs. Whitmore meant risking their own jobs. So mostly, they just stayed quiet and hoped things would get better on their own. They didn't. Now here's where I need you to lean and close, because what happened next changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Mrs. Whitmore had hosted a luncheon for her society friends, the kind of women who wore pearls to brunch and judged everyone by the label on their handbag. There was a diamond bracelet, a gift from Mrs. Whitmore's late mother, sitting on the vanity in the master bedroom. After the luncheon, the bracelet was gone. Mrs. Whitmore didn't call the police first. She didn't check the security cameras first. She marched straight into the kitchen, pointed her manicured finger at Rosa, and said the words that would end everything. You stole from me, get out of my house, and take that boy with you. Rosa's heart dropped into her stomach. She had never taken a single thing in 30 years. Not a coin, not a crumb. She begged, she pleaded, she said, please, ma'am, check the cameras, I would never. But Mrs. Whitmore wouldn't listen. Delia the cook tried to speak up, saying, ma'am, Rosa never even went upstairs today. She was in the kitchen all afternoon with me. But Mrs. Whitmore snapped at her too, telling her to mind her own business or find a new job herself. That silenced the room instantly. Fear does that to people. It makes good people go quiet when it matters most. Mrs. Whitmore called security. 2 men in black suits grabbed Rosa by the arms like she was a criminal, like she was nothing, and dragged her toward the front door while she sobbed, while little Karna screamed and tried to hold onto her sleeve. Let go of my grandma, she didn't do anything wrong, he cried, his small voice cracking, but nobody listened to a 6-year-old boy. Nobody ever really listens to the smallest voices in the room, even when they're speaking the loudest truth. Friends, I want you to sit with that image for a second. A 53-year-old woman thrown out of a house she'd given half her life to in front of her own grandbaby, accused of something she never did. If you've ever been wrongly blamed, wrongly judged, wrongly cast aside after years of loyalty, you know exactly what that feeling does to a person's soul. It doesn't just hurt your pride. It hurts something deeper, something in your chest that whispers, was all that hard work for nothing? They were tossed onto the sidewalk. No severance, no goodbye, no apology, just cold concrete and the sound of that iron gate slamming shut behind them. Rosa sat on the curb, shaking, tears streaming down her face, wondering how she'd pay rent next month, wondering how she'd feed her grandson, wondering if her whole life had just collapsed in the span of 10 minutes. She thought about her daughter, gone 2 years now, and how she had promised her on her deathbed, I'll take care of him, Mija. I'll always take care of him. And now she sat on a cold sidewalk, jobless, humiliated, wondering how she could keep that promise with nothing left to her name. But little Karna, this 6-year-old boy, wasn't crying anymore. He was staring at that gate with a strange, quiet fire in his eyes, and then he said something that stopped Rose's breathing. "Grandma, don't worry. I'm going to call Daddy Rich." Now, before I tell you who Daddy Rich was, I need you to remember this moment because everything is about to turn upside down. And if this story is already pulling at your heart, do me a favor right now, hit that subscribe button. Not for me, but for Rosa, for every hardworking grandmother out there who's ever been treated like she didn't matter. Subscribe because stories like this deserve to be heard, and I promise you, the ending is going to make you cry happy tears. Now let's go back to who this little boy was really calling. See, here's a secret nobody in that house knew. Rose's late daughter, Karna's mother, had once worked as a private nurse for an elderly widower named Mr. Aldrich Sterling. Sterling was one of the wealthiest men in the entire state, a business tycoon who owned half the buildings downtown. But he was also a lonely old man whose own family had abandoned him for his money. His two sons only called when they needed something signed, and his daughter had moved across the country years ago and rarely visited. Sterling used to sit alone in that big empty mansion of his, surrounded by wealth, starving for something money could never buy, real human connection. Then Rose's daughter walked into his life. She was gentle, patient, and kind, even on his worst days when the pain from his illness made him bitter and short-tempered. She read to him at night when the medications kept him awake. She held his hand during the scariest parts of his treatment. She talked to him like a person, not a paycheck. Sterling used to say she was the only person in years who looked at him and saw a man, not a bank account. When she passed away suddenly from an illness of her own, Sterling was devastated in a way he hadn't expected. He attended her small funeral, standing quietly in the back, a powerful man humbled by grief for a woman who had shown him more compassion in 2 years than his own children had shown him in a decade. Afterward, he approached little Karna, who was clutching his grandmother's hand, both of them lost in sorrow. Sterling knelt down to the boy's level and made a promise. "If you or your grandmother ever need anything, anything at all, you call me, day or night." He gave Karna a small phone just for emergencies and taught him one thing. "Just press the green button with my picture, sweetheart, and I'll come." That whole time, Karna sat quietly coloring in that kitchen corner. Nobody in the Whitmore house knew this little boy carried a lifeline to one of the most powerful men in America in his pocket. He kept that phone hidden in his backpack every single day, just like Sterling told him to, in case of emergency. And now, sitting on a cold sidewalk with his grandmother crying beside him, this 6-year-old boy understood, with a clarity far beyond his years, that this was exactly the kind of emergency Sterling had meant. He pulled out that little phone with trembling fingers and pressed the green button. 3 rings, then a deep, warm voice answered, "Karna, buddy, is that you?" And through tears, this brave little boy said, "Daddy Rich, they threw Grandma away. The mean lady said she stole something. Grandma didn't do it. Please help her, please." Folks, I don't know about you, but hearing a 6-year-old defend his grandmother like that, no hesitation, no doubt in his heart, pure loyalty and pure love, that's the kind of moment that reminds us what really matters in this world. In a world full of grown adults who stay silent to protect themselves, here was a little boy willing to fight for the person he loved most, with nothing but a phone and a promise. On the other end of that line, Aldrich Sterling's blood went cold, then hot with fury. He knew Rosa. He knew the sacrifices her daughter made, and he knew without a shadow of a doubt that this woman would never steal a single thing. "Where are you right now?" he asked, his voice suddenly sharp as steel. "Outside the big white house, the one with the gold gate," Karna said. "Stay right there, don't move, I'm coming." Now here's a question for you, dear viewer, and I want you to think about this honestly. Have you ever misjudged someone too quickly? Have you ever assumed the worst about a person before you had all the facts? Keep that thought in your mind, because Mrs. Whitmore was about to learn a very, very hard lesson about jumping to conclusions. 20 minutes later, a convoy of black cars pulled up outside the Whitmore mansion. Not one car, 4. Doors opened in perfect unison, and out stepped a tall, silver-haired man in an impeccable dark suit, flanked by 2 assistants and a lawyer carrying a leather briefcase. This was Aldrich Sterling, and when a man like that shows up at your door, uninvited, unannounced, you know something serious is happening. He walked straight past the stunned security guards, ignored the gasps from the luncheon guests still lingering by the window, and pushed the door open like he owned the place, because in some ways, financially, he practically did. Sterling had investments tied to half of Whitmore's husband's business empire, contracts worth more money than Mrs. Whitmore could probably imagine. Mrs. Whitmore came rushing out, confused, her face pale. "Mr. Sterling, what is the meaning of this?" Sterling's voice was calm, but there was a coldness underneath that made everyone in that room shrink back. "You fired my late nurse's mother. You accused her of theft. Did you check your cameras before you threw a 53-year-old woman and a 6-year-old child onto the street?" Mrs. Whitmore stammered. I was sure the bracelet, it went missing right after." "Check the cameras," Sterling repeated, each word landing like a hammer. With shaking hands, her butler pulled up the security footage on a tablet. The room gathered around, holding their breath. And there it was, plain as day. Mrs. Whitmore's own teenage niece, who had attended the luncheon, slipping that diamond bracelet into her purse when she thought no one was looking, glancing over her shoulder nervously before tucking it away. Rosa had never even entered that bedroom that day. The footage was undeniable, crystal clear, and utterly damning. The room went silent, dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on that marble floor. Mrs. Whitmore's niece, who was still at the house finishing dessert with the other guests, went pale and quietly slipped out a side door, but it was too late. Everyone had already seen the truth. Mrs. Whitmore's face drained of all color. Every guest who had gossiped and judged, every staff member who had stayed silent out of fear, every single person in that grand foyer now understood the truth. An innocent woman had been humiliated, publicly, cruelly, for a crime she never committed, all because of a rush to judgment and a complete lack of respect for a hardworking woman simply because of her position in life. Now, dear friends, I want you to pause here with me for just a moment. If your heart is aching right now for Rosa, if you're feeling that fire of injustice in your chest, please tap that like button. It tells me you're feeling this story the way I hope you are. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time, because what happens next is the moment of true justice, and you won't want to miss a second of it. Sterling turned to Mrs. Whitmore, his eyes like ice. "You didn't just fire an employee today. You humiliated a grieving grandmother in front of her orphaned grandson. You threw them onto the street like garbage without a shred of evidence. Do you have any idea who Rosa is to me?" Mrs. Whitmore shook her head, trembling, her hands gripping the edge of a nearby table as if she needed it to stay standing. "Her daughter cared for me when my own children wouldn't return my calls. She held my hand through chemotherapy. She read to me when I couldn't sleep from the pain. When she passed, I made a promise to that little boy that his family would never be without help again. And you threw her away like she was nothing." He then did something nobody expected. He turned to the household staff standing frozen against the walls, cooks, drivers, gardeners, maids, and he said, "Every single one of you stood here and watched an innocent woman get dragged out by force, and not one of you said a word in her defense, except one." He glanced at Delia the cook, who had tried to speak up earlier. "Loyalty isn't just about protecting your employer. It's about protecting what's right. Remember that, all of you, wherever you work next." Then, to the shock of everyone in that room, Sterling picked up his phone and made one call. Within the hour, legal notices were sent. Sterling, through his business connections, pulled every contract, every partnership, every deal his companies had with the Whitmore family's businesses. Mr. Whitmore's construction company, heavily dependent on Sterling's investment group, was suddenly facing the loss of its biggest financial backer. Board members started calling. Panic spread through that house faster than fire. Mr. Whitmore himself came rushing home from his office within the hour, having received a dozen frantic calls from business partners asking what on earth had happened. But Sterling wasn't done. He didn't just want financial punishment. He wanted the truth known, and he wanted Rosa's name cleared publicly so that no one could ever again whisper behind her back that she was that maid who stole the bracelet. He personally walked back outside to that sidewalk where Rosa still sat, cradling little Karna in her arms, both of them exhausted from crying. He knelt down. This powerful, wealthy man knelt down on the concrete in his expensive suit and took Rosa's rough, tired hands into his own. "Rosa," he said gently, "I am so sorry this happened to you. You will never have to worry about a place like this again. From this day forward, you and Karna are family, my family." Now, folks, I don't know how you're feeling right now, but if there are tears in your eyes, you are not alone. This is the moment we've been building toward, the moment where wrong finally becomes right, where a woman who gave everything and got nothing in return finally receives the dignity she always deserved. Sterling helped Rosa to her feet. He walked her not back into that cruel house, but to his own car. Inside, Karna sat between them, still clutching his little phone tightly, as if he couldn't quite believe it had worked, that pressing one button had brought this much help so fast. Sterling ruffled the boy's hair gently and said, "You did good, son. You did real good. Your mama would be so proud of you." Sterling offered Rosa a position, not as a maid, but as head of household affairs at his own estate, with a real salary, real respect, and a real home for her and Karna. He enrolled Karna in the best school in the city, the same private school where children of judges and doctors attended, and made sure the boy had tutors to help him catch up, new clothes, new books, and most importantly, a stable, loving home. He told Rosa, "You will never stand outside a locked gate again, begging for fairness. This is your home now, for as long as you want it." Before he closed the car door, he turned back one last time to Mrs. Whitmore, who stood on her porch, humiliated in front of her neighbors, her friends, her own staff. "You had a woman in your house for years who loved your family enough to work herself to exhaustion, and you repaid her with cruelty and false accusations. I hope this teaches you something about how you treat people who have less than you, but deserve so much more respect than you ever gave them." And with that, the convoy of black cars drove away, leaving the Whitmore mansion in stunned, shameful silence. Word spread through that neighborhood like wildfire. Within days, the story of what happened reached local news outlets. A young reporter, hearing about the dramatic scene outside the Whitmore mansion, tracked down Delia the cook for an interview, and she told the whole story, how Rosa had been dragged out despite her innocence, how a little boy's phone call had brought justice crashing down within the hour. The story went viral online. People were outraged on Rosa's behalf. Comment sections filled with strangers sharing their own stories of being wrongly blamed, wrongly judged, wrongly cast aside by people who had power over them. Mrs. Whitmore's so-called friends distanced themselves from her overnight, the same way vultures abandon a carcass once it's been picked clean. The very women who had sipped champagne at her luncheon that day now whispered about her at their own gatherings, calling her cruel, careless, and cold. Her husband's business partners grew nervous, worried about being associated with a family now infamous for public cruelty. The Whitmore name, once respected in high society circles, became a cautionary tale whispered at dinner parties. Remember what happened to the Whitmores? Fired their maid without proof, and it cost them everything. Within a year, they had sold that big house with the golden gate and moved away quietly, their reputation in ruins, learning far too late the true cost of cruelty. Meanwhile, in Sterling's grand but warm estate, Rosa began a new chapter. For the first time in 30 years, she wasn't just the help. She was respected, valued, protected. She had her own quarters, a fair wage, holidays off, and most importantly, she had peace. She oversaw a small staff of her own now, and she made sure to treat every single person under her with the kindness and respect she had been denied for so long. She often told the younger staff, "No matter how tired you are, no matter how small your job may seem to others, you deserve to be treated like a human being. Never let anyone make you feel otherwise." Karna thrived in his new school, made friends, and discovered a love for drawing that Sterling encouraged by hiring him a private art tutor. Every single night before bed, he would hug his grandmother and say, "See, Grandma, I told you Daddy Rich would come." And Rosa would smile through happy tears every single time, because this stubborn, brave, loyal 6-year-old boy had done something extraordinary. He hadn't just made a phone call that day. He had stood up for the person he loved most in this world when the whole world had turned its back on her. And that call didn't just save his grandmother's job. It restored her dignity, her safety, and her future. Sterling, too, found something he had been missing for years. He had a real family again, people who cared for him not because of his money, but because of the man he was underneath it. He often joined Rosa and Karna for dinner in the evenings, listening to Karna's stories about school, watching him proudly show off his latest drawings, feeling, for the first time in a long time, like he belonged somewhere. Now, before we close this story, I want to ask you something. If you were Rosa, sitting on that sidewalk, humiliated and afraid, would you have had the strength to keep going? And if you were in that room when the truth came out, would you have spoken up sooner or stayed silent out of fear like everyone else did? These aren't easy questions, friends, but they're worth asking ourselves honestly. This story reminds us of something so many of us forget in this fast, cold world. Kindness is never wasted. Rosa's daughter showed compassion to a lonely old man, and years later, that same compassion came back to protect her own mother and son when they needed it most. What goes around really does come around, folks. Every act of love plants a seed, and sometimes that seed grows into exactly the miracle you need, right when you need it most. sometimes years later in ways you could never have predicted. If this story touched your heart today, if you believe kindness always finds its way back to good people, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Because we bring you stories like this every single week. Stories about justice, about family, about the quiet heroes among us who never asked for recognition, but deserve it more than anyone. And before you go, drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever witnessed someone stand up for a person who couldn't stand up for themselves? I read every single comment, and I would love to hear your story too. Your stories matter just as much as Rose's, and I truly believe we can all learn something from one another. One more thing before we part ways today. If you know someone in your life like Rosa, someone who works hard, who gives everything, who never asks for much in return, take a moment today to tell them how much you appreciate them. You never know how much those simple words might mean to someone who has spent their whole life feeling unseen. Thank you for spending this time with me today, for opening your heart to Rosa and little Karna's story. Remember, no matter how hard life knocks you down, no matter how unfairly the world treats you, there is always a light waiting somewhere, sometimes in the smallest, bravest hands you'd never expect. Take care of yourselves, be kind to the people who serve you, love you, and stand by you, and I will see you in the next story. Until then, God bless, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button before you go.